listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96 with Melinda Francis and Norman Richmond. And joining us on the line is Dr. Gerald Horne, who has a brand spanking new book out called Counter-Revolution of 1836, Texas Slavery and Jim Crow. And I think I'm missing something out of that. On that, Dr. Horne?
And the roots of U.S. fascism.
I think that's kind of important. I think, I definitely have to apologize to the listeners for that one. And how is that book doing right now in terms of, I think I saw that you did an interview with the great Greg Carr. That seemed to have gone pretty well.
Yeah, that was on Black Star. You can find it online, or you can find it on Facebook, that interview. And I did 3 hours with WPFW in Washington, D.C. with Greg Carr. That was about 6 days ago, the day after Juneteenth, the official holiday, right. June 20th. And I've been doing a lot of, it's been getting I think it's getting attention because people are afraid about the rise of fascism. And they should be concerned because, well, I mean, just to jump right into it, you have this recent Supreme Court decision overthrowing women's reproductive freedom in states. I noticed that Justin Trudeau has said that women can come to Canada to have an abortion procedure if they can't get it in the United States of America. I assume Canada's not going to subsidize the visit. But in any case, I'm sure that was welcome. But I think that decision was then preceded by another decision basically overthrowing gun regulations in New York State. I mean, it's obvious that the Supreme Court has veered sharply to the right. But what I find particularly disturbing is that we cannot depend necessarily upon our left-wing friends to give us an analysis of why this is taking place right now. I mean, certainly they will say, yeah, it expresses misogyny. Yes, it expresses patriarchy. Yes, it has a disproportionate impact on women of color. But the question becomes this: how can you, out of one side of your mouth, talk about the United States being formed in the 18th century as a great leap forward for humanity? How can you valorize the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution, when it includes the Second Amendment, which the Supreme Court has interpreted to allow a situation where there are more weapons on the street than there are people? There are 400 million weapons by conservative count in this country floating around, oftentimes in the hands of deranged teenagers who shoot 10-year-olds in public schools, as happened in Uvalde, Texas, just about a month ago. And yet you're valorizing the Bill of Rights, which includes the Second Amendment. I mean, that's the contradiction of the U.S. left. And they don't sort out the contradictions. And I think that's one of the reasons why that particular book you mentioned is getting so much play, because I try to connect the history of this rising fascist tide precisely to the inglorious history of the United States as embodied in the state of Texas, as opposed to trying to argue inconsistent counts, as the lawyers say. That's when a lawyer goes into court and says, "Your Honor, my client didn't do the crime and he won't do it again." Well, basically, these leftists, they're talking about the United States' glorious history, but then when you get to today with this inglorious rise of fascism, they don't have an explanation. And we're really going to have to rely more upon our friends in Canada to help us sort this matter out. You are a neighbor. Oftentimes a neighbor knows more about the person they live next door to than others. And we're really going to have to rely upon the insight of our friends in Canada to help us sort out this messy situation. Because, as I've said before, if the home next door is on fire, which is what the United States is presently enduring, Canada should not expect to escape unscathed. You cannot escape unscathed if your neighbor's home is on fire. And let me also mention, although we can come back to this issue, that I predicted some weeks ago, and it's not because I have a crystal ball, but it just seemed logical, that the North Atlantic countries would begin to put pressure on Kaliningrad, which is this Russian city that's separated from the mainland of Russia, just like Alaska is separated from the mainland of the lower 48 states by Canada. And Kaliningrad is abutted by Poland and Lithuania. The next pressure point, it seems to me, will take place in the Arctic. It will take place between Canada and Russia. It helps to underscore why Canada is considering spending more on weaponry. It's a very dangerous turn of events, and I trust and I hope our Canadian friends are paying attention.
You have been talking about that for years, for decades on this particular show, I remember. But I wanted to talk about this whole Huey Percy Newton pointed out in, everybody's, not everybody, but this whole pride situation. It looks as if, in my judgment, it looks as if the state is promoting pride and making it in conflict with whose burden is the heaviest, getting the various movements to fight with one another. But I just want to remind people that it was Huey Percy Newton pointed out in 71, 72, or 73. He talked about gay rights way back then, and he was severely criticized by many, including myself, because we thought Huey had gone crazy. He talked about gay and, the whole question of different, not just struggling for African liberation, but struggling for, various other movements as well. How do you see that in 2022?
Well, what's happening now is that the LGBTQ issue has been in the crosshairs of the ultra-right. As a matter of fact, Clarence Thomas, the black member of the U.S. Supreme Court, he warned in the decision overthrowing Roe versus Wade that the same logic that led to the overthrow of Roe versus Wade could be used to challenge gay marriage, could be used to return to the days when people were prosecuted for engaging in homosexual activities. In fact, he also suggests that contraception itself may be on the chopping block. And I would go a step further, and I think that certain heterosexual acts also may be criminalized. So the United States, it's headed backwards at warp speed. And you may have seen the headline from Idaho just a few days ago. I try to keep up with what's going on in Idaho because it's really the epicenter of neo-fascism, believe it or not, even more so than Texas, although Texas neo-fascists are more populist. And so in Boise, what happened a few days ago is that these right-wing militias were about to attack this LGBTQ parade before they themselves were raided. Now, certainly, as you suggest, there are some issues to sort out with regard to that community. And in fact, this is something that I've thought about but have not commented on. But I find it very intriguing that of late on Broadway, which is the epicenter of stage production, plays, musicals, etc., that there have been a number of award-winning stage productions involving Black LGBTQ characters, including the Tony Award-winning production Strange Loop, which swept the Tonys just a few days ago. In fact, it was really remarkable how many awards that it won. And in the United States, there are a few things that are coincidences, unless you're a coincidence theorist, which I'm not. And so I was wondering what that might mean. Was that a step forward in terms of addressing the interests of an otherwise neglected community, or is there something else involved? Now, I haven't put on my thinking cap, but as the lawyers might say, I'm quick claiming that to the audience so they can put on their thinking caps and help come to some sort of question, some sort of analysis of what it may mean.
Melinda, you have another question?
Did we want to talk about Rwanda?
Well, your prime minister, Mr. Trudeau, is in Kigali, Rwanda, as we speak, for the Commonwealth Head of Government's meeting. Boris Johnson, the prime minister, and Mr. Trudeau just left for the Bavarian Alps for the G7, the group of 7. Now, what's interesting about Kigali is that, number one, Prince Charles, who may be your future head of state in Canada, apologized once again for the pain, quote unquote, inflicted by the African slave trade. Now, what's interesting is that the monarchs, including Queen Elizabeth, they've been on an apology tour, apologizing for the slave trade. And of course, Prince William, when he was just in Jamaica, he was hooted because, and of course, Jamaica might be on the road to Barbados land and ousting the monarchs as head of state. But what's interesting is that in the United States of America, and where Britain once played a role, that is to say pre-1776, but now, as you know, it's an independent country, you rarely hear these politicians say anything about slavery, even though you got more black people in the United States and you got people altogether in Canada. And I was just on a podcast yesterday talking about reparations, and many black people, they've worked themselves up with the idea that reparations is just around the corner in the United States. We'll see. I mean, I don't want to rain on anybody's parade, but as I've said many times in the past, I think if reparations comes to the United States in particular, it'll have to be the result of a massive global mobilization, in which case Prince Charles's remarks in Kigali need to be considered in that context. Now, I should also say that Togo and Gabon, who, as you may know, could be considered part of Francophonie, that is to say, the former French colonies in Africa, like Rwanda, which was also previously part of Francophonie, they would like to join the Commonwealth, the so-called Anglosphere, which is interesting. I know why Rwanda bolted from Francophonie, because it blames France for the genocide of 1994, not only the colonialism that pitted the Tutsi against Hutu in the run-up to April 1994, but also for its dereliction of duty in April 1994. However, with Togo and Gabon now applying to join the Commonwealth, I would like to think that the Francophonie is leaking members, but that requires more investigation before coming to a conclusion.
Yeah, I've been to Togo. That's one of the most beautiful spots I've ever seen in my life. We came into Togo on a Friday, and the Muslims were doing their evening prayer. Juma, I guess it was the Juma prayer. I believe that's what you call it. And Togo is one of the. It's a very controversial. I think they had the first military coup in Africa took place in Togo, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I've oftentimes, I have some Togolese U.S. friends, and I've oftentimes suggested that they need to investigate the bloody coup against Sylvanus Olympio, who was the descendant of Black Brazilians, just like you had Black Americans and Black Canadians who moved to Sierra Leone and Liberia. You had Brazilians who moved across the Atlantic too, to Nigeria, to Togo. And what was interesting about the coup against Sylvanus Olympio, which is one of the reasons I wanted these Togolese U.S. folk to investigate, was that after he was killed, his body was dumped in front of the U.S. Embassy. So my question obviously is why? And I haven't had time to investigate, and I haven't been able to encourage my Togolese friends to investigate either.
Togo is a strange situation. Well, it's not so strange. It was really showed me colonialism in terms of, I remember going to, you cross, you're one side of the border, they are speaking English and maybe Twi, and on the other side of the border, the same people are speaking French and Twi or whatever language that particular ethnic group speaks in Togo. I never will forget that as long as I live, and that's just I guess that was just colonialism carving up Africa like it was a pizza or a turkey. I guess that's that's what it was. But Melinda, you have a question?
Well, let me mention one more point about Togo before you depart, which is
Go ahead.
When I was in Togo some decades ago, and my main trip was to Ghana. It's a next door neighbor, but I decided to take a day trip into Togo. And what has stuck in my mind to this very day is that in Togo, women were riding these motorcycles, for example. That wasn't the case in Ghana, across the border. And once again, I was never able to draw inferences as to why there would be that difference and what it might mean and what was the historical context that led to that divergence.
That's something I'm going to investigate, because Nkrumah was known as a pretty progressive gentleman when it came to the question of women. Many people says that he was talked about Pan-Africanism, but he attempted to take a more progressive position on women than a lot of the other leaders. But Togo, I'm definitely going to do some investigating on that question as soon as we get off the phone.
This was after Nkrumah, by the way. This was during the reign of the military men.
Oh, okay, all right. Oh, was that when Jerry Rawlings was in power?
It was even before Jerry Rawlings.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because Jerry Rawlings took over from he was a military man, but he came to power. Right, I got you. I'm clear. Sorry, I cut you off, Melinda.
Do we want to go into the new developments in Lumumba?
Yeah, as you know, his remains were returned to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and actually, remains is actually probably an exaggeration. What was returned was a gold tooth, because when he was killed, apparently his assassins burned the body in acid, and the assassins included Larry Devlin of the US CIA. You can read his memoir, where he talks about his dastardly role in that crime. And so what happened a few days ago is that the monarchs from Brussels came to Congo They did not apologize. Of course, they did not issue a decree mandating reparations, but they did return remains of Lumumba's body. And the whole assassination of Lumumba, it's something that has been tackled in the book White Malice by the British author Susan Williams, which I recommend because she also looks at the downfall of Nkrumah. And the two were linked because Nkrumah and Lumumba were comrades. And Nkrumah was seeking to aid Lumumba. Both were accused falsely, needless to say, of being Soviet dupes. This idea of being in Moscow's corner has a lengthy pedigree, I'm afraid to say. But in any case, one of the points that I mentioned in an interview on Radio Sputnik out of Washington just a few days ago, it can be found on Facebook, is that what's interesting right now about Congo is not only the exploitation of its mineral wealth, but also that you have a number of Europeans who were born in Africa who are oftentimes in charge of that exploitation. I'm thinking of Glencore. You spell it like it sounds, headquartered in Switzerland, headed by sons of apartheid, that is to say with roots in apartheid South Africa, a la Elon Musk of Tesla, a la Peter Thiel, Thiel, one of Trump's closest comrades, who spent his teenage years in apartheid-occupied Namibia, a billionaire investor who helped to get Facebook off the ground, by the way. And so what's curious, and this is, I was gently reminding our Canadian friends how they need to provide a detailed critique in the United States. I would say Black Americans haven't done a very good job of pointing out to our African friends and comrades about all these Europeans who were involved in the exploitation of Africa, who have roots either mostly in apartheid South Africa, many of them living here, right here in the United States. I mean, Glencore, for example, has just paid hundreds of millions of dollars in fines because of bribing African leaders. So it's encouraging corruption on the continent. And you cannot begin to talk about Africa's mineral wealth, bauxite, iron ore, etc., without talking about Glencore. Once again, my interview about Congo was on Sputnik a few days ago and can be found on my Facebook page.
Dr. Horne, let me ask you this question. What are people saying about, what are the people saying about the, everyone knows that Patrice Emery Lumumba was murdered on January 17th, 1961. Not everyone, but many people who follow Africa know. But has there been anybody talking about Joseph Okito? I think Joseph Okito was born in 1909. He was the oldest, and also killed was Maurice Mpolo. He was the baby of the. He was born in 1929. Is there any movements around, their families keeping their name alive?
Not to my knowledge. Susan Williams' book, which I recommend, just came out, White Malice, may reference that, and it's very well footnoted. So if there is an answer to your question, most likely you can find it there.
Yeah. Last thing on that question, in the movie, the Raoul Peck's film on Lumumba, there's a scene where they're receiving independence and they're dancing, and Impolo is telling Lumumba that, basically let's throw all of the Congolese, throw all the Belgians out, kill them, throw them out, da-da-da-da. And Lumumba's kind of patting him on the head saying, like, cool off, young man. It's like, you're taking it a little bit too far. I know you remember that scene.
Oh, yes. And as I also mentioned And I also should point listeners to an interview I did on KPFK Freedom Now with the author Robert Harms, Harms of Yale, who did this book on Congo, where he talks about King Leopold, talks about the genocide, talks about the exploitation of rubber as the auto industry takes flight 120 years ago. He also talks about the depopulation of elephants, which then fuels the piano trade. Pianos become household items in North America about 120 years ago as African elephants are being depopulated. So I would recommend listeners tune into that interview as well, which can be found both at kpfk.org a few weeks ago, and if not there, on the Facebook page.
So I guess my father and mother, I guess they contributed to that, because we always had a piano in my house until from the time I could walk and talk. I remember we had pianos, but I guess a lot of African people from the South and from the Caribbean, reading Randy Weston, did you have a piano in your house, Dr. Horne?
Oh, sure, but it was a player piano. In other words, it's a piano that was sort of a robot piano. It played tunes automatically.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was electronic.
What'd you say, Melinda?
It was one of those electronic keyboards.
Well, I can't recall it running on electricity. It's really an old-fashioned. You don't have player pianos anymore. They've fallen into disuse.
Another question, Melinda.
Do we want to talk about Turkey and the Saudis?
You said the Saudis, correct?
The Saudis, yeah.
Right.
And Turkey.
Well, Prince Mohammed bin Salman was just in Turkey. Recall that Turkish-Saudi relations were not very positive. Recall also that Turkey was the colonial master in Saudi Arabia for the longest period of time. But in any case, the latest ruffled feathers came when the Saudis apparently authorized the killing of the dissident journalist Jamal Khashoggi in a consulate, the Saudi consulate in Turkey, and then chopped him up. His body is yet to be found. And Mr. Biden is also headed to Saudi Arabia, although he's trying to play it off by saying he's going to a Gulf Cooperation Council meeting where it just so happens that Mohammed bin Salman will be there. The Saudis really need to be brought to account for their genocidal war in Yemen. It's probably the most devastating war taking place right now on planet Earth, which you'd never know from this overload of coverage on Ukraine. But in any case, the Saudis have not been brought to account. And with Mr. Biden heading to meet with Mohammed bin Salman, it won't happen anytime soon. And speaking of Mr. Biden, I should mention this G7 meeting before time expires, the Group of Seven. What's interesting about the Group of Seven is that they're like a fighter in a match that's calling for backup. What you see is that at the G7, they've called in Prime Minister Modi of New Delhi for consultations, although in the current issue of Foreign Affairs, which is published by the Elite Council on Foreign Affairs on the posh Upper East Side of Manhattan, you have an article by Ivo Dalder, a top U.S. diplomat, who says the G7 should be expanded to the G12. Who are the other extra members? He doesn't mention India. He mentions New Zealand, Australia, the European Union, and NATO, and South Korea. He let one non-European entity slip in. But what it really bespeaks is that this hysteria about China, because the BRICS just met, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and we just received news that President Putin is heading on his first foreign trip since the intervention in Ukraine. And as part of his foreign itinerary, He will either be meeting in Jakarta or in Moscow with the leader of Indonesia. And speaking of which, there is talk about the BRICS expanding as well. Argentina is basically down on its knees begging to be admitted to the BRICS. Others have talked about MITI joining the BRICS, speaking of Mexico, Iran, Turkey, and Indonesia. And so you have the development of these blocs. It's clear that the North Atlantic powers need backup for this fight, which is why they're talking about expanding their ranks and why Prime Minister Modi is in the Bavarian Alps as we speak, communing with Trudeau, Johnson, Macron, Biden, et al.
Last thing, Coup Modi from India, he is pretty bad news when it comes to I guess to the people of India and as well as the international community. He's essentially taking the side of U.S. imperialism, wouldn't you say?
Well, yeah, generally speaking, except for Russia, that's the problem. Matter of fact, they're offering Prime Minister Modi everything except the kitchen sink to turn against Russia. Now, thus far, he hasn't budged. He's certainly willing to turn against China. I mean, that's a done deal, in fact. That's why he's in.
That's easy, right? That's easy, right? Right.
That's why he's in the Bavarian Alps as we speak. Turning against Russia is a horse of a different color. And of course, a journalist, I've been made to understand, has just come out with bombshell revelations that connect Modi, before he became prime minister, to the massacre of thousands of Muslims in Gujarat, in India. Let's see if that gets international coverage, or alternatively, since he's being courted by the North Atlantic powers, will they suppress this news?
And I think we have run out of time. Is there anything else you would like to add, sir?
Well, that last point underscores the need for diasporic music. I know you're not in fund drive right now, but it's never an inopportune moment to make a donation to diasporic music.
We appreciate that, because next week we will be in fundraising mode, and we will be looking for your verbal support to rack it up for us.
Right on.
And I'd like to thank Lisa Watson, Melinda Francis for their contributions, Lisa for taking